The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another webinar that we host. Before we begin, I would like to ask you whether you can hear me. So could you please type either in chat session or in questions that you can hear me and see my screen. Okay, great. There's few things about webinar and how we run it. First of all, you will be in a listen-only mode and will be able to type in questions either in questions box or in a chat box, and we will discuss them after the webinar, the presentation is finished. Once webinar is finished, we will share with you the recording of the webinar, so you will be able to kind of show it with your colleagues. And also, if you want to know more about webinars we host, please follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social networks. So just to remind you what we are and what we're doing. So ChemSpace is a platform for small molecules, and we host the largest catalog available to search and buy from. It holds over 40,000 in-stock building blocks available from over 30 preferred suppliers and over 6 million in-stock screening compounds. Also, we offer access to billions of make-on-demand analogs of those in-stock compounds that can be synthesized and delivered to the lab relatively fast and with a high success rate. This collection of catalog is available online through chemspace.com and /search. You can find basically all those molecules using typical ways, either through exact match, substructure, or similarity. You can also do the text search or import files you have received after the docking, for example, experiments. Also, the catalog is available through API integration with the client application and through punch-out site. As I mentioned, we have over 30 preferred suppliers whom we source building blocks and reagents from. And with today's webinar, we would like to start presenting the suppliers and allow them to show what they are actually doing and how they can create the variety of chemistry presented in their catalogs. And today we would like to start from Enamine and Enamine and their basically research. This is a research-driven company, and today Dr. Oleksandr Grygorenko, consulting scientist at Enamine, will talk about the research they're doing to enlarge and expand their catalog. Few words about Oleksandr. So he holds PhD in chemistry from Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev, where he is also associate professor. And since 2017, he's a consulting scientist at Enamine, and he's doing very cool research there, about which he will tell us today. With that, I would like Oleksandr to present, and I would and then we'll talk about the questions. Yeah. Oleksandr.
Thank you, Yura. Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. Thank you again for your kind invitation and for your introduction. I would like to present our research which we are doing in our groups at Enamine. Only publications in 2 last years will be discussed here, so these are quite fresh publications. And you can see here some agenda of my talk. I shall start with general overview. Then I will go to various classes of building blocks that are published in various papers, and then switch to some parallel chemistry that we are doing and research that is related to real space extension, and finish with some outline. So let's start with some general slides on scientific research. Mainly, we are publishing our results from our non-exclusive projects that are either completely internal or some collaborations, first of all with Ukrainian academic institutions and with other companies and academic institutions worldwide. Of course, the major interest of Enamine here is to highlight our products in these publications. So most of these publications which are related to non-exclusive products are described as either building blocks, most of them, or compound libraries, some parallel chemistry, some virtual libraries, etc. It is also a good opportunity for our employees to get PhD. We collaborate with Kyiv academic institutions, with Taras Shevchenko University, where I'm also associate professor, as Yura have mentioned in the introduction. And our scientific activity is steadily growing here in Enamine. You can see this from the graph and from numbers shown on the slide. Recently, a dedicated team of a small team was created to support the scientific research at Enamine, which I'm heading currently. Of course, this group is not the only one who does the research. About 1/3 of publication, around 30% of publications is related to activity of this group. But in this presentation, I will show you only results from where I was involved, more or less in some publication. So, what about journals where we are typically publishing? Of course, most of our papers are published in organic chemistry journals. This is Journal of Organic Chemistry, European Journal of Organic Chemistry, other journals in synthetic organic chemistry. There are some publications, typically high level one, that are in General Chemistry Journal or even General Science Journal. We had very successful and productive year, 2 years, and had 4 publications in Nature and Grygorenko, for example. One review in Chemical Reviews was published by Pavel Mikhailuk just recently. Also, we have some publications in related areas, for example, European Journal of Medicinal Chemistry, BMCL, Organic Medicinal Chemistry Letters, and some more specific journals like Chemistry of Heterocyclic Compounds, Fluorine Chemistry, and so on. In this presentation, I will focus mostly on the papers that are coming from either JOC or EuroJOC, but some other papers will be also mentioned. So let's go to the first part. I'll start with building blocks that are analogs of saturated ring systems. It is widely known that saturated ring systems like morpholine, piperidine, piperazine, cycloalkanes are widely represented in many drug compounds, and their analogs, of course, are of high interest to medchem projects, and they are also interesting as building blocks to include in our catalog. The first paper was published in JOC, describes this very nice 3-dimensional morpholine and piperazine analogs that are in fact, propylanes. Of course, many of you know about the smallest propylane, 1,1,1 propylane. This chemistry is quite popular in recent decade, I believe. But in this publication, we describe synthesis of larger propylanes, which are still interesting. They are much more stable, of course. They can be handled as usual organic compounds. They are either amines or monoprotected diamines. So the synthesis here starts with 3+2 cyclo addition reaction, and so that the pyrrolidine ring is formed at the first step, and then we use nucleophilic cyclizations either at oxygen atom or at nitrogen atom to construct the remaining ring of the three-cyclic system. You can see that these compounds are close homologues, and one might ask why such close analogues are needed. They should have very similar properties. The answer comes when you look at the three-dimensional structure of these compounds. You can see that X-ray data show that these compounds have very different conformation when even the smallest variation by adding one single methylene CH2 unit is performed. So the related disposition of heteroatoms provided by these three-cyclic or bicyclic systems are very different. So the whole set provides a possibility to probe the chemical space around this core with great variation of the relative disposition of the corresponding exit vectors, so-called. And it is clearly seen from the exit vector plots. I will not describe in my talk this tool in details, but if you are interested I have some additional slide on this, and we can discuss this in question section. So these compounds are quite similar to the area where most saturated six-membered rings are located. It is beta area in this plot, but they are also different from the viewpoint of orientation of exit vectors. So while having very close distance between heteroatoms, they are oriented in a completely different manner. So indeed, they are quite different in terms of their three-dimensional structure. Another set of morpholine and piperazine analogues and piperidine analogues is shown in the next work. Their design is based on such a stretching of these six-membered rings, and the stretching is, of course, it is not chemical. It produces it not chemically, but only theoretically. So when stretching is strong enough, you obtain a two-membered ring connected by a single bond. And these compounds can be obtained by very simple, very classical chemistry, which is based on using 1,3 dielectrophile and the corresponding one-atom nucleophiles. So we have obtained the compound 6 in several steps from the commercial materials, and it can be produced on quite large scale. And then it can be introduced into the reaction with N nucleophile, C nucleophile, S nucleophile, or subjected to cyclization at oxygen atom, so that these analogues of saturated six-membered rings are obtained. If structures of these compounds are compared, you can see that they are expectedly larger than the corresponding saturated six-membered rings. This is seen from this plot, where the corresponding data points are located quite distantly from the common areas for saturated six-membered rings. And of course, they are somewhat more flexible due to presence of this bond, so they provide a range of conformations, and therefore they can be used for substitution of the corresponding saturated six-membered rings in corresponding biologically active molecules. This paper was featured on the cover of the job, as you can see on the right of this slide, with this corresponding picture. Another work is related to carbocyclic systems. In fact, these compounds are bicyclopentanes, which are shown here, but not the well-known bicyclo 1,1,1 pentanes, which are used as isosteres for benzene ring. These ones are bicyclo 2,1,0 pentanes, and they can be considered as analogs of monocyclic cycloalkane rings, for example, cyclopentane or cyclohexane. These compounds are also called Hausan because of their molecule shape. And as you can see, they were highlighted on job cover with a photograph of the town Brugge in Belgium, which was taken by one of the authors. And indeed, they resemble the shape of one of the houses, as you can see here. So, chemistry. As for chemistry, we have started with cyclopentane derivatives, and then they were subjected to desymmetrization of at one of the edges of the cyclopentane rings. So two stereogenic centers were created in a stereoselective manner, in diastereoselective manner. We have used here either addition of bromine and nucleophile, for example, bromine and fluoride, or bromine and azide ion. Or you have used ring opening of epoxide, of the corresponding epoxide, with organometallic reagents to produce this stereochemistry. This orientation was produced via inversion of one of the chiral centers, for example, using Mitsunobu reaction or something like that. The third center which is present in these molecules was not defined, so we had in fact mixtures of diastereomeres in both cases, but after deprotonation the structure becomes flattened, so the configuration of this chiral center becomes unimportant, and then cyclization occurs in diastereoselective manner, and the corresponding diastereomerically pure Hausan derivatives are obtained with high efficiency. These compounds are quite stable. They can be used to obtain amides, but for some of them, we had observed the ring opening of the system. For example, when we tried to obtain the ketone group here. Nevertheless, we have obtained quite large series of such nice derivatives, as you can see from this list down below. We also obtained, for example, these amino acids, which were in fact even separated by chiral stationary phase HPLC. So these gamma aminobutyric acid GABA analogs were obtained in optically pure form and characterized by X-ray structures. And also we have studied physicochemical properties of the Hausan derivatives, and we have found that these scaffolds are quite similar to the parent cyclopentane or cyclohexane derivatives. They are somewhat flattened and somewhat smaller than the parent hydrocarbons. The pK values were not affected significantly, but the lipophilicity of the compounds was reduced in the analogs studied. So these compounds are slightly more hydrophilic than the parent cycloalkane, and this can be used to alter the physicochemical properties of the corresponding cycloalkanes in drug optimization, in early drug discovery, for example. And one more work on analogs of saturated rings is related to synthesis of piperidine derivatives. I will not be talking here a lot about chemistry, but we have developed an approach to introduce primary or secondary an alkyl or cycloalkyl substituent at any position of the piperidine ring with high efficiency, which if this can be done on multi-gram scale. We use only two-step reaction sequence here, which relies on methylation of the pyridine derivatives, which are available in bulk quantities. There are conditions that can selectively methylate these pyridine derivatives. And then we quench the corresponding organometallic intermediate with electrophile. And then reduction of the pyridine ring is performed, and it can be done in such a way that the hydroxy group is removed or retained at the corresponding step. And this sequence was so efficient that we have even performed it in flow reactors, as you can see from this scheme, so that truly large bulk quantities were obtained. This was published in Eurojog and highlighted by this nice cubic Rubik-like cover picture. The next part of my talk is related to fluorinated cycloalkanes. We have a large experience here at Enamine in preparing such compounds. Of course, they are highly interesting to our customers, and of course, they are interesting for applications in medicinal chemistry. In particular, we have a series of work on synthesis of gamma-difluorocyclopropanes. We use the Rupert Prakash reagent for that reason, and we have published a series of works previously that describe the difluorocyclopropanation of various functionalized compounds to prepare the corresponding building blocks having an additional functional group apart from the cyclopropane. And this year, in 2020, I'm sorry, we have published a book chapter on an invitation of Dominique Cahart and Jun-An Ma. This book was published by Willy on emergent fluorinated motifs, and it contains many interesting fluorinated groups that are not very common that have not been very common in medicinal and organic chemistry until now. You can find there a detailed description of not only our works, but also all other information on difluorocyclopropanes. Apart from difluorocyclopropane chemistry, we have also prepared their larger homologues, and in fact, all of them were prepared. And in 2019, we have published a paper which was called Last of the Gem Difluorocycloalkanes, which is not completely true, of course, but this was indeed the last one from the smaller difluorocycloalkanes. That is compounds that have difluoromoiety at alpha position to the corresponding functional group. The chemistry here was quite simple, but it required some optimization and required some small tricks to overcome the problems of strength for ring related to strength for ring. And we have developed an approach to obtain the compound 6, which is the key intermediate here. It contains the protected hydroxymethyl group, and it can be subjected to dioxofluorination with reagents like dust of Morph dust on large scale again. And this allowed us to obtain the corresponding building blocks that are shown on the right part of the slide with very high efficiency. Also, we have performed a characterization of these compounds by means of physicochemical methods, different physicochemical methods, including X-ray diffraction studies and measurements of pKa and log-P. While for pKa, everything was quite obvious. With log-P, some interesting effects were observed. In fact, introducing 2 fluorine atoms at the alpha position of the cyclobutane ring decreased the log-P of the compound by 0.2 units of log-P. The isomeric compounds had the same lipophilicity as the parent cyclobutane derivatives. Therefore, this fluorination can be used to increase polarity of the compounds. And we believe that this is quite interesting effect, and we are planning to study this in more details using all the difluorocycloalkanes that we currently have in our hands, and this will be published in the upcoming publication. On this job cover, you can see this difluorocyclobutane placed at the moment of creation, the known painting. And you can also see all other difluorocycloalkanes hidden here in the constellation. As I have told you, these were the cyclobutane derivatives were not the last cycloalkanes, of course, fluorinated. We have extended this methodology to cycloheptane derivatives. At the first glance, that such design, if it can be called design, can be considered as somewhat simplistic. Indeed, why just adding what may be found interesting in just adding additional methylene unit? But we have shown in our previous works that cycloheptane and cycloalkanes in general have very specific conformations that are significantly different from those observed for other smaller cycloalkanes. So with these building blocks, you can obtain the disposition of the corresponding functional groups, the difluoromethylene unit and the corresponding functional group, which is very unusual and not characteristic for the corresponding lower homologs. Therefore, synthesis of these compounds is interesting and can be justified. We have used quite robust chemistry here, so that multi-gram quantities of this compound could be obtained. In the to obtain alpha-alpha disubstituted defluorinated building blocks, we have used a nice method recently described by Dillman's group, which is related to difluorohomologation of the cyclohexanone of the corresponding 6-membered ketone, and then all the necessary building blocks were obtained by standard typical functional group modifications. To obtain the isomeric beta-beta defluorinated derivatives, we have started from cycloheptanone and added the corresponding nucleophile, and then after fluorination, and transformation of the corresponding functional groups, the corresponding building blocks were obtained with good efficiency. To obtain isomeric 4,4 defluorinated cycloheptane derivatives, ring expansion of the 6-membered rings was used in both cases shown here. So we used reaction with ethyl diazoacetate. Sorry. And for the first set of building blocks, we have used a compound that already has fluorine atoms. In the second case, defluorination was performed after the ring expansion. This work, which was published recently in Eurojob, describes only synthesis of these compounds, but we are planning to have their 3-dimensional structure. In fact, we have that in hands already, but the publication is under preparation now. And also we expect to have all the p-values, and it would be quite interesting to see how the disposition of these functional groups affect the lipophilicity of the compound. As I told you before, as for pK, it is quite more or less obvious, but with log P, which is another important characteristic, this is not so obvious. We have also turned our attention to more complex fluorinated cycloalkanes, those containing the fluoroalkyl group in their structure. I will be quite short. To make this story shorter, we shall not discuss the chemistry here. It was more or less simple, and also there were some chemical tricks that had to be performed. You can read about them in the corresponding publication if you are interested. But we have prepared all possible building blocks having monofluoromethyl, methyl, difluoromethyl and 3-fluoromethyl groups, and all the stereomerically pure building blocks that are shown here on slide. And then we have measured the physicochemical properties of the derivative again. Whereas for most of the compounds, the log P trend followed the correlation which is observed for acyclic derivatives. In particular, when you add in one fluorine atom, you have a significant drop in log P value. Then some lipophilicity is regained when you introduce another fluorine atom. And finally, the lipophilicity becomes even greater than for the methyl derivatives when the third fluorine atom is introduced. This U-shaped curve is typical even for acyclic derivatives, so it was observed for most cyclopropane derivatives that have been synthesized. But there was one data point that was that did not follow these rules, and we address this to interaction between this trifluoromethyl group and the carbonyl atom, the carbon atom is the carbonyl group. Indeed, this interaction was observed in the by X-rays in the crystalline structure. We have also found some shielding in the carbon NMR spectra. So this conformation, which has the dipole moments of the corresponding functional group oriented in the same way, is indeed present for at least in some concentration for this compound, which might be an explanation why this compound is much more polar than expected. For isomeric derivative, which has NH and CO groups interchanged, the corresponding dipoles are oriented in an opposite direction. The phosphorylated effect is not such important for this compound, and you can see usual behavior for this data point on the bottom graph. We have also developed approach to synthesis of cyclobutane derivatives of analogous structure. It was published in Eurojob and both were highlighted by these star-like cover pictures. But for cyclobutanes, we have could prepare only trans-isomeric derivatives so far. No such effect was observed, at least so far. So only the usual U-shaped curve was retained for the lipophilicity of these compounds. The next part of my talk is related to organoboron chemistry. We have had a lot of activity in this area in recent 2 years. In fact, 2 PhDs were defended by our employees in December 2020 on this in this area, and many more are surely coming. So I'd like to tell you something about our sp3 enriched organoboron building blocks, which are at the focus of our recent research in several groups. One of the first publications in this area is related to Boron-Borovittig reaction. This reaction is of course known, was of course known in the literature. It was described 5 or even 10 years ago. I can't recall the precise year. But it was described mostly for aromatic derivatives, mostly for aldehydes. So its scope was quite limited, and we have performed significant extension of the reaction scope to many aliphatic ketones, cycloalkanones, heteroaliphatic alkanones, and they worked pretty well in this chemistry, so that these nice building blocks having a lot of sp3 atoms and organoboron moiety were obtained with high efficiency multi-gram scale. And we have used these compounds in our further studies as starting materials. And we have found some interesting effect for the stereochemistry of this reaction. In fact, some of the derivatives having heteroatoms as the corresponding position were obtained with high stereoselectivity, which can be explained by this coordination of the oxygen atom to the boron center, to one of the boron centers. And where, for the cases where such coordination is possible, we had observed high Z stereoselectivity. For other compounds, mixtures of diastereomers were formed, where such coordination was not energetically favored. So we started using this compound in further transformations, and we became interested in cycloadditions at double bond of the organoboron compounds. We have started with the simplest derivatives known so far, simply vinyl trifluoroborate, and we have found that we have optimized the conditions for a very efficient cycloaddition of carbenoids generated from diazoalkanes, either in palladium or copper catalyzed reactions. For each of the diazoalkanes, some specific conditions have to be should be developed to obtain the products with the highest possible efficiency. The reaction has modest diastereoselectivity, but diastereomers were easily separated by crystallization, and at least trans diastereomer was obtained with high efficiency. So these bifunctional building blocks were obtained, mono and bifunctional building blocks were obtained as pure diastereomers. It is quite interesting that the corresponding pinacolates worked in this reaction gave much poorer results. This might be addressed to some electronic differences for the double bonds, which is caused by the boron-containing substituent, but this effect was not studied to a significant extension today. The corresponding building blocks were quite efficient in both CC couplings, classical Suzuki-Miura reaction, and also in CM couplings with azoles under Chen-Lam conditions. So these building blocks are indeed efficient to introduce the corresponding cyclopropyl, functionalized cyclopropyl system into organic molecules. We have also used our beloved difluorocyclopropanation. We have also applied it to the corresponding trifluoroborates that were obtained by us earlier. And this method worked very well too, and the corresponding difluorinated cycloalkanes were obtained in high yields. Again, the pinacolates didn't work as well in this reaction, so the presence of trifluoroborate and transformation of the corresponding pinacolates into trifluoroborate was essential for its success. So far, we have some problems with CC coupling of these reactions. Palladium does not work very well here, but we have obtained some promising results with photoredox coupling, iridium nickel catalyzed photoredox coupling, but this needs some optimization so far. So these reactions on, so these data on the coupling were not included in this paper. Only synthesis was documented here. And then we have switched to 2+2 cycloaddition, and it was found that the corresponding bicyclic systems can be easily obtained by the reaction of Enamine myelin with the corresponding vinyl, the corresponding alkenyl boropinacolates. These reactions of this type were studied thoroughly with other substrates by the group of Pavel Mikhailuk, who is also working here at Enamine, and we have used their conditions to introduce the corresponding organoboron derivatives, and indeed these conditions worked very well. So the corresponding bicyclic derivatives, one were obtained with quite good quite good yields, but with moderate diastereoselectivity. Exoproduct, which is thermodynamically more stable, was obtained with higher efficiency. For some of the derivative, for example 1A, this reaction was scalable and the corresponding products were obtained on multi-gram scale. We didn't check this for all other derivatives, but we think that this method should be efficient also for them. We have transformed this compound into the corresponding aminoboronate by removing this protective group and reduction of this image functionality. And it was shown that functionalization at the boron moiety is possible, but again, no palladium didn't work here. We should use photoredox iridium nickel dual coupling, but under this condition, the CC coupling works pretty well with such derivatives. We have also extended the scope of this reaction to other to dust-substituted boropinocolates, but in this case the reaction became quite difficult and complex mixtures were formed. We could confirm formation of at least 3 diastereomers in the reaction mixture. This is characteristic for the radical process, for the formation of biradical intermediates in this reaction. So the excited state of maleimide likely reacts in as triplets in a triplet state, so that formation of all possible diastereomers occurs. Also, the reaction could be extended to some other maleimides and maleic anhydride, but apart from maleic acid derivatives, these conditions were not applicable to other alpha-beta unsaturated compounds. So it is most suitable for other bicycloheptane derivatives. These compounds can be obtained by this chemistry with quite good efficiency. We are continuing our studies in cycloaddition on cycloadditions of boron substituted alkenes, and some more publications are to come soon. And we have also summarized all the literature data in a review published in Synthesis in 2020. And if you are interested in this chemistry, you can read about it in this large paper, quite large paper. We have also some very interesting but quite different chemistry, organoboron chemistry, which is related to functionalized midaboronates. In particular, we have obtained the smallest acyl midaboronate, which contains the formyl group, and we have shown that this compound, although it is very unstable and can be handled only in solutions, it is typical aldehyde, which can react with most typical aldehydes, nucleophiles. For example, you can obtain hydrazone, oxime here. You can perform reductive amination. You can perform Knoevenagel reaction, and some more complex reactions are also possible. You can perform the reactions with organometallic reagents or enolates, and you can even obtain midaboronates containing the beta diketone moiety or enone moiety. These compounds were quite unusual and quite unprecedented in the literature, and we have even shown that these compounds can be subjected to heterocyclization, so they are usual carbonyl compounds. The midaboron moiety survives under these conditions, and this was published in Angewandte Chemie in 2020. Other example is related to alpha bromo ketones containing midaboron moiety. These compounds were known only for some real representatives. We have extended this chemistry to a large series of aliphatic sp3 enriched compounds, and this was published in Eurojob and was highlighted by this nice Van Goghian style cover picture. This was made by my friend Vitaly Boklashuk. In fact, this is real painting, so it was painted and then photographed for the cover of this picture of this journal. And perhaps this is the last part of my talk about building blocks before we go to some combinatorial chemistry, and it is related to bicyclic sultams. We at Enamine do a lot of work on organosulfur chemistry, organosulfur building blocks, and of course sulfonamides are known in medicinal chemistry and in drug discovery for very many years, but some derivatives of aliphatic series, especially bicyclic, are quite unusual, and I shall start with bicyclic sultams with bridgehead nitrogen atom, which can be considered as analogs of well-known bicyclic amines, like quinoclidine, which is present in many natural compounds. Unlike the parent amine, these sulfonamides have no basic properties. There are almost no protonation at a nitrogen atom does not occur here. They also can be considered as analogs of twisted amides or twisted lactams. These compounds were obtained perhaps 30 years ago or so, or even less, by Professor Komarov when he was visiting Cambridge University and the group of Anthony Kirby. So these twisted amides are quite reactive, quite unstable compounds that can be isolated, but they typically react by breaking this amide bond, or at least addition of nucleophile at this carbonyl group. Unlike amides, these sulfonamides are quite stable, quite the typical sulfonamide derivatives, and they were first obtained in the late 19th by the group of Leo Packet, who have passed away in 2019. So we propose calling these compounds Packet sultams in his memory. He used very difficult, very complicated approach to obtain these compounds. It was based on organostanol-based reductive cyclizations. So the CC bond was constructed. In our approach to these compounds, we have used more straightforward approach, which is based on the formation of sulfonamide bonds. So the synthetic disconnection was performed as it should be done by the rules proposed by Corey at the most obvious bond in the molecule, sulfonamide bond. We have obtained amino sulfonyl fluoride as hydrochlorides, and when we have subjected them to basic conditions, they underwent cyclization almost spontaneously at room temperature, and the corresponding sulfonamides were obtained with high efficiency. Not only larger Packet sultams were obtained that were originally described by Packet, but even more strained structures, including compound 8, which is the smallest the smallest Packet sultam known so far, obtained. This compound also formed under similar conditions, although the somewhat stronger base was required to complete the cyclization. Some of the derivatives still did not underwent cyclization. For example, compounds 9 and 10 could not be obtained. After obtaining these compounds, we have performed their thorough characterization. First of all, by X-ray diffraction studies, and we could manage to obtain the single crystals even for this very strained compound, sulfonamide 8. The nitrogen atom in this structure is so highly pyramidalized that the sum of the valence angles at this atom is only 285. This is one of the most pyramidal nitrogen atoms in sulfonamides. Only aziridine derivatives are have such large pyramidalization. But in this case, the bicyclic system causes very large strain energy for this compound, and increasing the length of the sulfonamide bond. It is almost 0.02 angstroms, 0.6 angstroms, sorry, higher than usual in usual sulfonamides. And this occurs due to rehybridization of the nitrogen atom. And we have studied these compounds theoretically. They are very interesting models to study the nature of the sulfonamide bond, to understand the nature of sulfonamide bond. And we have found that it is the S character of the nitrogen atom contribution to the sulfonamide bond, which is crucial to the energy of this sulfonamide bond and for distance between the S and N atoms. With the exception of one data point, a perfect linear correlation was observed between the sulfonamide bond length and this hybridization parameter. We have obtained only preliminary data on the chemical reactivity of this interesting compound. Sorry. And we have found that it can can undergo hydrolysis even in 1 molar aqueous acid, so it is quite strained indeed. We have predicted the highest strain energy for this bicyclic system. It is higher than any strain energy of any sulfonamides that we have used to compare this compound. Still, it is quite stable, and we believe that after proper functionalization, it might be interesting, for example, for design of covalent inhibitors or something like that. Again, this compound was highlighted on job cover by this very nice painting. It is again, it is real painting done by an artist and then photoed for this journal. Of course, we thought about introducing this packet sulfonamide, packet sultam moieties into the corresponding building blocks and to obtain some functional compounds. And we have found that lithiation of these compounds is quite possible, and so that carboxylic function can be introduced very easily at the alpha position to the sulfur atom. The most strained packet sultam did not underwent this reaction well, and ring opening of this bicyclic system unfortunately occurred. For the compound 1F, the reaction did not work either due to beta elimination, but all other carboxylic acids were obtained. Some of them were obtained as single diastereomers, others were not. So these compounds can be used to introduce the corresponding bicyclic structures into potential drug molecules. We have also obtained a series of compounds having the carboxylic function in a bridgehead position. In this case, we had to obtain them from the start, from the scratch. So the chemistry was quite simple here. We introduced the sulfonyl fluoride moiety to the alpha position to the CN group, and then after removal of the protected group, cyclization occurred under typical conditions, so that the corresponding nitrile was obtained, and then hydrolysis was performed quite efficiently. And in this case, the bicyclic system of the smallest packet sultam survived the reaction conditions. In this case, the compound was obtained, the corresponding carboxylic acid was isolated as lithium salts, This is not related to instability of this of the target carboxylic acid. Instead, the problem is related here to very high hydrophilicity of this derivative. So we could not simply isolate it as a free carboxylic acid just because problems with extraction. So it was characterized as lithium salts, as lithium salt. All other compounds were obtained with high efficiency, and this was published in EuroJOC last year. The related chemistry was obtained, was used to obtain some other bicyclic sultams, for example, paracyclic sultams having either cycloalkane or heteroaliphatic moiety adjacent to the sultam moiety. And we have obtained both beta sultams and gamma sultams by cyclization, which is quite similar to the previously to the one that was shown on the previous slide. In this case, the corresponding sulfonyl fluoride having a nitrile group was obtained, and then after reduction of the nitrile moiety, cyclization occurred spontaneously, so the sultams were obtained with high efficiency. And we have characterized some of them with X-ray structures. You can see that some of them contain additional functional groups, so they are essentially bifunctional compounds. In our recent review on bicyclic sultams, on saturated bicyclic sultams, you can see not only this type of chemistry, but all the known bicyclic saturated sultams were described today. And this review is available from European Journal of Organic Chemistry. And to finish my talk about sulfonamides, my part of the talk about sulfonamides, I'd like to draw your attention to bicyclopentane derivatives. These compounds are widely used and widely proposed as benzene, benzene isosteres. We have obtained the corresponding sulfonamides that contain additional functional group for the first time, and to obtain these compounds, we have used interrupted Barton decarboxylation that was used to introduce the thiopyridine moiety, the sulfur atom, adjacent to the bicyclopentyl scaffold. Of course, some precedents were present in the literature, but we have optimized this step so that it could be used on a gram scale, and it was found that adding this compound, this additive, was necessary to improve the yield of the target product significantly. Then the compound was oxidized and subjected to cleavage of the pyridine ring, so the corresponding sulfinides were obtained, and then they were transformed to the sulfonamides and sulfonyl fluorides that are bifunctional building blocks again. And in particular, an analog of classical sulfonamide drug, sulfur drug, the sulfanilamide analog, was obtained, which is, of course, more interesting as building block. We have shown that this compound has no antibacterial activity, of course, but it is quite nice BCP-derived building block that can be used for drug optimization. And this paper was published again in EuroJOC just because while we were working on this chemistry, the simple sulfinate, lacking any functional group here, was published in Chemistry European Journal along with our paper, along with publication of our job, of our work here. And the final part of my talk is related to some combinatorial chemistry, some chemoinformatics studies. You might know about Enamine's product, which is called Real Database in Real Space, which is now commercialized together with ChemSpace, with ChemSpace company. And this project was started more than a decade ago, and it was used. It relied on quite simple chemistry at the beginning. So the idea was to produce some virtual chemical space, which is highly accessible and highly confident and can be obtained with high synthetic efficiency. At least 80% efficiency is expected here, and with short times, so that the compounds can be considered as almost off-the-shelf compounds. They are of course virtual, but they can be produced very efficiently and very easily. And we are constantly adding some new chemical methods to extend this chemical space. Some of these methods meet the requirements and the standards that are used for real space, and they are the corresponding derivatives, the corresponding virtual library members are included into real space. Some of them remain of more scientific interest. For example, this work that was published in the last issue of SAS Combinatorial Science in 2019. This journal was closed, unfortunately, so now we publish our combinatorial chemistry achievements in General Organic Chemistry journal. So this work was related to synthesis of amino tetrazoles, and we have proposed two methods that that differ only in the approach to the key intermediates that are thioureas. One relies on isothiocyanates, and the other ones employs the reagent BTTC, which was proposed by our combinatorial chemistry group as very efficient to obtain a very efficient reagent to obtain thioureas. These compounds are not isolated. These all reactions are performed in one pot manner. Then alkylation with these sultams occur, and cyclization upon action of the sodium azide finalizes the synthesis of the corresponding amino triazole derivatives. And this reaction allows to have two variation points in the reagents. Nevertheless, in the starting reagents, quite a huge chemical space is generated, especially by the second method, where the corresponding derivatives are much more accessible than the isothiocyanates. So a chemical space of nearly million compounds could be produced quite easily by this methodology. The synthesis success rate is is moderate, so we did not include these compounds into our real database at the moment, but the approach itself is quite interesting and can be used to produce such compounds. In our other work, which is related to significant extension of real database, this was published in iScience quite recently. We described the methodology to obtain virtual space that exceeds many billions of compounds. And this approach relies on a very simple idea. We use bifunctional building blocks that have validated reactivity and perform the stepwise functionalization in one pot manner. We have used several reaction sequences to achieve this type of chemistry, to achieve this disconnection, which is shown here. And so far we have found that two methods were acceptable for the very high synthesis success rate that is required for real space, to generate the real space, but we are still working on optimization of this chemistry. In particular, the functionalization of monoprotected diamines with carboxylic acid worked very well to obtain very huge chemical space, which exceeded, which gave most of the fraction of these compounds that were included into this ultra large library. And also amide coupling followed by a click reaction was very efficient too. And these methods, this approach shows that multi-billion chemical space can be obtained very easily, and the compounds are still quite diverse and quite interesting in their chemical structure, and some examples are shown on the lower part of this graphical abstract. But with this space in hand, one might ask how this space can be used further to explore and to obtain some biologically active compounds. We have demonstrated this in our several papers, collaborative papers. I will show the results from only one of them, which I had participated in. This work was done with our colleagues from Biosolve IT, who did the chemoinformatic part, some chemoinformatic part of work. And this workflow, which is shown on slide, demonstrates the idea behind how the chemical space, how this real space, which is very large but synthetically still very accessible, can be used with high efficiency. So we have started with some preliminary hits that were identified in one of our previous projects, and use them as query molecules to obtain some analogs from the real space. At the moment, at that moment, the real space was much smaller than it is now, but still we could find a lot of analogs. The search was based on, was not simply substructural, or it did not rely on classical similarity search, fingerprint-based searches. Instead, it used F3's methodology, which was developed and was pursued by our colleagues from Biosolve IT. And this preliminary set was then enriched by docking to identify a small fraction of virtual hits that were synthesized. Most of them were obtained. 29 of these compounds were synthesized, in fact. And then, after preliminary biological experiments, physical experiments, some hits were identified and validated. And then, after IC50 determination, we have ended with micromolar hits, sub-millimolar hits, maybe. These compounds were identified very fast, very quickly. So this the whole project could take a month or two, or even less. There were some organization issues that's why this paper took somewhat longer. But experimental part and theoretical part took very short time here. And indeed, this methodology is very efficient. So first we start with some virtual screening techniques, which can handle such large chemical space. In fact, this large chemical space is not even stored as a database. It is constructed upon search, and then very fast, very quickly, you end with some preliminary hits that can undergo further optimization. And this methodology was the efficiency of this methodology was demonstrated in two papers, in which Yuri Moroz participated. They were published in Nature, and in these works, nanomolar hits were identified using essentially the same ideologies, first starting with virtual screening, and then synthesis very efficient, very fast, and then biological validation. And in these two works, nanomolar hits were identified. And I'd like to finish my talk by citing our review paper in Chemistry European Journal that was published in January 2020, before this all crazy COVID things, which is called The Symbiotic Relationship Between Drug Discovery and Organic Chemistry. And on the graphical outline for this paper, you can see one of the most beautiful examples of symbiosis in nature, the colibri bird, which flies out of the flask and then produces some concepts in medicinal chemistry and in drug discovery. And most of these and all these concepts are discussed in this review. So if you are interested in this in our viewpoint on this subject, you can refer to this paper. It took quite long to collect all this information, so I think that this can be quite interesting reading. And you can find all the information on our scientific activity at Enamine sites in the corresponding section related to publications. You can also follow us on Twitter. This is my personal account, and also our company's accounts. We post regularly information about our scientific activity. And if you have any further question, you can also contact me by email, and I will be happy to answer some questions after after my talk is finished. And I'd like to thank you for your attention. I hope that it was not too long for you. And if there are any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, for this really comprehensive and nice presentation. Doesn't really over time here. I probably let's answer to a few questions, and then we can answer other questions offline. So there's a question. Recently, a molecule of the week was 4-fluorocyclohexanone. What is the maximum scale that you can produce?
Well, I was not involved in this particular synthesis, but as far as I know, it was produced on a 10-gram scale or so, so it is quite large scale as for building block synthesis.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to ask you about difluorocycloalkyl parts. Did you obtain such an effect, lower log P, on cycles with more carbons? And do you have plans to find reasons for such effects?
Well, we are only expecting to do these measurements, so this work is in progress now. But as far as I know, this effect can occur quite often in aliphatic series. So the fluorine in aliphatic series can affect the lipophilicity, not in the way that it affects it in aromatic series. So the lipophilicity of compound can increase indeed, and this might be related possibly to increased dipole moment of the molecule, and it depends on the orientation of the corresponding functional groups to the fluorine atom, adjust to the fluorine atoms. And indeed, this effect is quite interesting. We expect to study this in more detail for all the cycloalkanes that were obtained.
Yeah, thank you. So in 2020, there have been few publications on automated synthesis or automated high throughput synthesis with robotic assistance. Does Enamine use similar for the space exploration part, especially in the dialkyl aminothioureas?
Yes, we have some robotic systems to produce compound libraries, but we have also more classic vial techniques. Each of the technologies has its own drawbacks and limitations, and some benefits, of course. For the robotics, their main benefit is that compound loading can be decreased significantly. But if you need to obtain more or less large amounts of the compounds, 100 milligram scale, for example, then of course you should use the vial technique. As for the virtual chemical space generation, in fact, it doesn't matter which technique will be used further. Which particular technique will be used further. Both of them can be applied. Of course, this is only virtual coupling, but synthetic efficiency, of course, has to be tested. But usually we observed that either robotic systems or classic vial solution techniques have similar synthetic synthesis success rate. So I believe that there is no much difference by which way the compounds are then produced after they are identified as virtual hits.
Thank you. And probably the last question related to also kind of synthetic capabilities of enamine. Does enamine work in the area of biocatalysis, or your transformations and synthesis are purely enzyme-free?
We have a dedicated unit who is involved into enzymatic synthesis. Mostly they do enzymatic resolutions and they obtain optically pure compounds. For example, there are many works on amino-lipase, and this unit is headed by Doctor of Science Kolodyazhna, who have defended her obtained her Doctor of Science degree in this area. So there are some scientific activity in this area, but personally I was not involved in this chemistry so far, at least.
Thank you so much. And with this, I would like to close the webinar. Thank you again, Oleksandr, for a really nice presentation. And for those who still have questions, please send them over to me or to Oleksandr using the mentioned emails. And yeah, well, once we'll share the video with you of the webinar once it's available. Thank you very much, and have a good one.
Thank you.